There is a plant that grows 4 inches in a single day, not under laboratory conditions, not with synthetic fertilizers or hydroponic rigs or any technology more advanced than a 5-gallon bucket filled with mud and water. You cut it at the stem, and within 3 to 4 days it has grown back enough to harvest again. You can repeat this cycle continuously for months from one container sitting on a porch or a patio or a fire escape. The plant is not rare. It is not experimental. It is not some genetically modified prototype still working its way through clinical trials. More than 1 billion people across Southeast Asia eat it as a daily staple vegetable. It is sold in open-air markets from Ho Chi Minh City to Manila to Jakarta for pennies a bunch. It has been cultivated continuously for longer than most modern crops have existed. And in the United States of America, the federal government has classified it as a noxious weed. In multiple states, planting it in your own backyard is a criminal act. The plant is called water spinach. Its scientific name is Ipomoea aquatica, and the reason it is illegal has nothing to do with your health. It is completely safe to eat. The reason is far stranger and far more revealing than that. Water spinach is not actually spinach. It belongs to the morning glory family, a sprawling group of plants known for aggressive growth habits and remarkable environmental adaptability. The connection to spinach is purely culinary. The leaves are tender and mild, similar enough in flavor and texture that European colonizers in Southeast Asia gave it the name it still carries in English. But the resemblance ends at the plate. Unlike true spinach, which is a cool weather annual that bolts in summer heat and requires careful soil management, water spinach is a semi-aquatic tropical plant that thrives in exactly the conditions most garden vegetables cannot tolerate: standing water, intense heat, heavy humidity, poor soil. Conditions that would rot the roots of a tomato plant or drown a bed of lettuce are precisely what water spinach prefers. Give it waterlogged ground or a shallow container of muddy water and full sun, and it does not just survive. It explodes. The historical record of water spinach cultivation stretches back at least 2,000 years across the river deltas and coastal lowlands of Southeast Asia and southern China. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests it was among the earliest deliberately cultivated greens in the regions surrounding the Mekong, the Yangtze, and the Irrawaddy river systems. This is not incidental. These are some of the most productive agricultural corridors in human history, feeding some of the densest populations the ancient world ever sustained. Water spinach was not a luxury crop in these systems. It was infrastructure. In flood-prone regions where rice paddies dominated the landscape, water spinach filled the nutritional gaps that rice alone could not cover. Rice provided calories. Water spinach provided vitamins and minerals. It grew in the same waterlogged conditions as rice, often alongside it, requiring no additional land, no additional irrigation, and almost no additional labor. It was a vegetable that essentially grew itself in the margins of an existing agricultural system, and it did so with a speed and persistence that no other leafy green could match. The nutritional profile explains why entire civilizations leaned on it so heavily. Water spinach is dense in vitamin A, critical for immune function and vision. It delivers meaningful amounts of vitamin C. It is unusually high in iron for a leafy vegetable, which made it particularly valuable in regions where animal protein was scarce or expensive. It contains calcium, potassium, and magnesium. And unlike many nutrient-dense greens, it does not carry high levels of oxalates that interfere with mineral absorption. It is, by almost any nutritional measure, one of the most efficient edible plants on the planet in terms of what it delivers relative to what it demands, and what it demands is almost nothing. Sunlight, water, a growing medium that can be as basic as river silt or backyard clay. No fertilizer program, no pest management regimen, no specialized equipment. This is a food source that a family with no land, no money, and no agricultural training can produce in continuous supply from a single container. In Vietnamese cuisine, Water spinach is so foundational that it appears in nearly every category of cooking. Rau muong shao toy, water spinach stir-fried with garlic, is served in homes and restaurants alike as a near-daily staple. In the Philippines, kangkong is sautéed with shrimp paste or folded into soups and stews with such regularity that its absence from a table would be more notable than its presence. In southern China, where it is called ong choy or tung choy, it is blanched, stir-fried with fermented bean curd, or tossed into hot pots. In Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Myanmar, the pattern repeats. This is not a specialty ingredient. This is not a garnish or a curiosity. It is one of the most widely consumed vegetables on the face of the earth. More people eat water spinach on a daily basis than eat broccoli, kale, or conventional spinach combined. And yet, in the United States, the country that produces more food per acre than almost any nation in history, you can face legal consequences for growing it. The federal classification of water spinach as a noxious weed came through the Federal Noxious Weed Act and subsequent regulatory updates administered by the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. The concern is ecological, not toxicological. Water spinach is an aquatic and semi-aquatic plant with a growth rate that borders on biological absurdity. In warm climates with access to water, it can form dense floating mats that spread across the surface of ponds, canals, drainage ditches, and slow-moving waterways. These mats block sunlight from reaching submerged plants. They reduce dissolved oxygen levels, they alter water flow, they displace native aquatic vegetation. In Florida, where waterway management is already a perpetual battle against invasive species like water hyacinth and hydrilla, the introduction of another aggressive aquatic grower was treated as an unacceptable risk. Texas adopted similar restrictions. Several other southern states followed. The federal listing meant that transporting water spinach across state lines became a violation of federal law, subject to seizure and penalty. None of that regulatory logic is irrational on its own terms. Invasive aquatic species have caused genuine ecological damage in the United States. Water hyacinth alone costs millions of dollars a year in waterway management across the Gulf states. The precautionary impulse to prevent another fast-growing aquatic plant from establishing wild populations is understandable in isolation. But isolation is exactly the problem, because this decision was not made in the context of food security. It was not made in the context of household food costs. It was not made in the context of nutritional access for low-income families. It was not made with any consideration of the fact that this plant could provide continuous fresh greens to families who otherwise rely on nutrient-depleted grocery store produce shipped from 1,000 miles away. It was made within the narrow institutional mandate of invasive species management by an agency whose job is to protect agricultural infrastructure and natural ecosystems, not to evaluate whether the American food system is failing the people it is supposed to feed. And this is where the pattern becomes visible, because water spinach is not the first food source banned or restricted, not because it is dangerous to humans, but because it threatens the management assumptions of existing systems. It is not even the most dramatic example, but it is perhaps the most revealing one because the contradiction is so stark. The plant is legal to sell in Asian grocery stores in many states. You can buy it, cook it, and eat it without restriction. What you often cannot do is grow it yourself. The act of purchasing it from a supply chain is permitted. The act of producing it independently, at home for nearly zero cost, in a container that requires no land and no expertise, is the act that triggers legal exposure. The consumer is welcome. The producer is suspect. That distinction is not unique to water spinach. It runs through the entire regulatory architecture of American food. There is a deeper economic layer here that rarely gets discussed in polite company. Water spinach does not require seeds every season. Once you have a cutting, you can propagate it indefinitely. It does not require fertilizer, it does not require pesticides, it does not require irrigation infrastructure, it does not require a tractor or a tiller or a single piece of mechanized equipment. It does not require land. It produces a harvest every 3 to 4 days from something you can buy at a hardware store for less than $5. There is no recurring cost. There is no input supply chain. There is no margin for a seed company, a chemical company, an equipment manufacturer, or a retail distributor. Every calorie and every vitamin it produces is extracted from sunlight and water at functionally zero cost after the initial setup. From the perspective of a household trying to feed itself through a period of sustained grocery inflation, this is close to an ideal food source. From the perspective of an industrial food economy built on recurring consumer purchases, it is an economic nullity. It generates no revenue for anyone other than the person growing it. And in an economy where food is one of the largest and most consistent categories of consumer spending, a plant that allows households to exit that spending cycle even partially is not economically neutral. It is structurally inconvenient. None of this means the ecological concern is fabricated. It is not. Water spinach genuinely can spread in warm aquatic environments. But the response to that concern reveals priorities. In several Asian countries, water spinach is cultivated at enormous commercial scale, with standard containment practices that prevent ecological escape. It is grown in managed ponds, in raised beds, in containers, and in controlled hydroponic systems that pose no meaningful risk to surrounding waterways. The technology to contain it is neither exotic nor expensive. A 5-gallon bucket is already a closed system. A raised garden bed with no drainage into a natural waterway is already a closed system. The idea that a retiree growing water spinach in a plastic tub on a back porch in Georgia represents an ecological threat comparable to agricultural runoff or industrial water pollution is not a serious scientific position. It is a bureaucratic default. It is the product of a regulatory system that is structurally easier to restrict than to reform, and that treats blanket prohibition as simpler than contextual management. In 2003, after sustained pressure from Asian American farming communities, the USDA did issue a limited exception. A federal permit system was created that allows the cultivation and sale of water spinach under specific conditions in certain states. Texas, which has a significant Vietnamese and Chinese American farming population, was among the states where licensed production became possible. But the permit process itself is a barrier. It requires paperwork, inspections, compliance monitoring, and ongoing regulatory engagement that effectively limits production to commercial growers willing to navigate federal bureaucracy. The home gardener, the backyard grower, the retired couple looking to supplement their food supply during a season of $7 lettuce remains outside that system. The permit exists for the market. It does not exist for the household. And the distinction is not accidental. Meanwhile, grocery prices continue to climb. The cost of fresh vegetables in the United States has risen significantly over the past 5 years, and the trajectory shows no sign of reversing. Leafy greens are among the most volatile categories, subject to drought impacts in California and Arizona, diesel cost pass-throughs in long-haul refrigerated transport, and labor shortages at every stage of the supply chain. The average American family spends more on produce today than at any point in the past 2 decades, and the nutritional quality of that produce is declining simultaneously. Studies from the University of Texas and other institutions have documented measurable drops in vitamin and mineral content across common vegetables over the past 50 years, a phenomenon linked to soil depletion, high-yield cultivar selection, and accelerated harvest cycles that prioritize appearance and shelf stability over nutrient density. The food is more expensive and less nutritious at the same time, and somewhere in the background of that reality, a plant that can produce iron-rich, vitamin-dense greens every 4 days in a bucket of mud remains functionally inaccessible to the average American household through a combination of federal classification, state-level prohibition, and regulatory indifference to the difference between a drainage canal and a container on a patio. This is not an argument that the government should ignore invasive species risk. It is an observation that the framework used to evaluate that risk has no mechanism for weighing it against food security, nutritional access, or household economic resilience. The two concerns exist in separate institutional silos that never communicate with each other. The USDA's Invasive Species Division does not consult with its own Nutritional Guidance Division when making classification decisions. No cost-benefit analysis has ever been published that weighs the ecological risk of containerized water spinach cultivation against the economic and nutritional benefit of enabling households to grow their own fresh greens at near zero cost. The regulatory system does not ask that question because it was not designed to. It was designed to manage threats to existing agricultural and ecological systems. And in that design, the household is not a stakeholder. It is not even a variable. There is something worth sitting with in the image of a plant that has fed 1 billion people for 2,000 years, growing 4 inches a day in nothing but water and sunlight, classified by the United States government as a noxious weed. Not because it poisons anyone, not because it fails any nutritional test, not because a single human being has ever been harmed by eating it, but because it grows too well, because it is too easy, because it requires too little, because it asks nothing from the industries that have built their entire business model on the assumption that feeding yourself requires buying something from someone every single week. That assumption is not a law of nature, it is a commercial arrangement. And water spinach, sitting quietly in a 5-gallon bucket on a porch somewhere in Texas, growing back faster than you can cut it, is a living reminder that the arrangement is not the only option. It never was,